It was an ordinary Sunday morning when I stumbled upon them in the park. Elizabeth was sitting on a bench, her hand resting gently on the shoulder of a tall man, and they looked like they had their own little world. My heart stopped for a moment. Elizabeth, my wife, my best friend, was betraying me? That evening, I gathered the courage to ask her about it. She was startled and tried to deny it, but I could already see the truth in her eyes. Elizabeth had been working at the bookstore ever since we moved to our new town. She always said she loved her job, and I was always happy for her. She told me his name was Michael. He was a regular customer who came in every week for new books. The first time they talked was when Michael asked for recommendations. Elizabeth suggested a few of her favorite books. They started talking more often. At first, it was conversations about literature, then about personal things. One day, when the bookstore was quiet, Michael invited Elizabeth for coffee. She agreed, not realizing this would be the beginning of something more. Elizabeth and Michael began spending more and more time together. They met after her work, discussing the books they both loved. I noticed she was becoming more distant, but I always blamed it on her being tired from work. With each passing day, their relationship grew closer. They started attending literary events together, events Elizabeth never mentioned to me. She began making excuses to stay longer at work or go out in the evenings. She told me there was a genuine passion between them. She felt that with Michael, she had something special that our marriage lacked. Elizabeth said she never wanted to hurt me but couldn't stop herself. I couldn't listen to her justifications any longer. My world was falling apart, and I didn't know what to do. I simply walked out of the house, trying to collect my thoughts and understand how to live with this betrayal. Days turned into weeks, and I struggled to make sense of the chaos that had upended my life. I couldn't get the image of Elizabeth and Michael in the park out of my mind. The betrayal stung deep, and I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and confusion. Elizabeth tried to talk to me several times, but I couldn't bear to hear any more about her and Michael. I avoided her at home, finding solace in late-night drives and long walks. I didn't know how to confront the situation or if I even wanted to. One evening, Elizabeth approached me cautiously. She looked tired, her eyes red from crying. "Can we talk, please?" she pleaded. Reluctantly, I agreed, knowing we couldn't go on like this forever. We sat in the living room, the silence between us heavy and suffocating. Elizabeth began to speak, her voice trembling. "I never meant for any of this to happen," she said. "I love you, but I got lost along the way. Michael, he was just there, and things spiraled out of control." I clenched my fists, trying to hold back my frustration. "Why didn't you talk to me? Why didn't you tell me you were unhappy?" I asked, my voice breaking. "I didn't know how," she admitted. "I thought I could handle it on my own, but then Michael came into my life, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. It was wrong, and I know that now, but it's not that simple." She told me about their conversations, how they started innocently enough, discussing books and sharing recommendations. They discovered they had a lot in common, and their talks gradually became more personal. Elizabeth found herself confiding in Michael, sharing thoughts and feelings she hadn't shared with me in a long time. Their first meeting outside the bookstore was spontaneous. Michael had invited her for coffee after a particularly engaging conversation. Elizabeth agreed, thinking it was harmless. But that coffee date led to more meetings, more conversations, and eventually, an emotional connection that neither of them could ignore. Elizabeth explained how their relationship grew, how they found themselves attending literary events together, events she never mentioned to me. "It felt like I was living a double life," she confessed. "I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop. I was drawn to him in a way I can't explain." Her words cut deep, but I could see the pain in her eyes. She was torn between the life we had built together and the feelings she had developed for Michael. I wanted to hate her, to scream and shout, but all I could feel was a profound sadness for what we had lost. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I made a terrible mistake, and I don't know how to fix it, but I want to try, if you'll let me." I didn't know if I could ever forgive her, but I realized that we needed to confront this together. "We need help," I said finally. "We can't do this on our own." Elizabeth nodded, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "I'll do whatever it takes," she promised. And with that, we took the first tentative step towards healing the wounds of her betrayal. In the weeks that followed, Elizabeth and I sought the help of a marriage counselor. We both knew that if there was any hope of salvaging our relationship, we needed an unbiased third party to guide us through the tangled web of emotions and mistrust. Our first session was awkward and tense. The counselor, Dr. Harris, a calm and compassionate woman in her 50s, began by asking us to share our perspectives on what had happened. Elizabeth spoke first, recounting her initial interactions with Michael, the seemingly innocent conversations about books, and how those discussions evolved into something deeper. "I felt seen and understood in a way I hadn't in a long time," Elizabeth said softly. "It wasn't about you, Mark. It was about me feeling lost and disconnected." Her words stung, but I knew they were honest. Dr. Harris turned to me and I tried to explain my side. "I thought we were happy. I didn't see the signs. I trusted her completely, and this blindsided me." Dr. Harris nodded, her expression empathetic. "It's important to recognize that infidelity often stems from deeper issues within the relationship. Elizabeth, you've acknowledged feeling disconnected. Mark, what about you? How did you feel in your marriage before this happened?" I paused, reflecting on the past few years. I guess I was complacent. I assumed everything was fine because there were no obvious problems. But maybe I took our relationship for granted. As our sessions continued, we delved deeper into our individual and shared experiences. Elizabeth admitted that she had been struggling with feelings of inadequacy and loneliness, but she had hidden them, thinking it was her burden to bear alone. I realized that my lack of attentiveness in our routine-driven life had contributed to her sense of isolation. We both had to face uncomfortable truths. Elizabeth's affair with Michael was a symptom of deeper issues that we had ignored for too long. It was a painful process, but slowly, we began to communicate more openly and honestly. We started setting aside time each day to talk, really talk, about our feelings, our fears, and our hopes. One evening, after a particularly intense counseling session, Elizabeth and I sat together in our living room. There was a tentative closeness that hadn't been there for months. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I've hurt you more than I can ever make up for." "I know," I replied, reaching out to hold her hand. "But I don't want to give up on us. We've come this far, and I want to see where we can go from here." We decided to take a break from the daily routine and planned a weekend getaway to a small cabin by the lake. It was a place where we had spent some of our happiest moments early in our marriage. We hoped it would help us reconnect and remember why we fell in love in the first place. The cabin was just as we remembered it, nestled among the trees with a serene view of the water. We spent the weekend talking, walking, and rediscovering each other. There were moments of laughter and tears, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope. As we sat by the fire on our last night, Elizabeth looked at me with a sincerity that brought tears to my eyes. "I want to rebuild our trust, Mark. It won't be easy, and I know it'll take time, but I'm committed to us." I nodded, feeling a mixture of apprehension and determination. "Me too, Elizabeth. We'll take it one day at a time." The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time since discovering the betrayal, I felt that we had a chance to heal, to grow, and to rediscover the love that had brought us together in the first place. The weeks turned into months, and the journey of rebuilding our marriage was anything but linear. There were days when the weight of Elizabeth's betrayal felt unbearable, and other days when the glimmers of our past happiness gave me hope. Our counseling sessions with Dr. Harris continued to be a cornerstone of our healing process. One particular session stands out in my memory. Dr. Harris asked us to write letters to each other, expressing our deepest feelings without fear of interruption or judgment. We were to read them aloud during our next meeting. I spent hours writing mine, pouring out my pain, confusion, and the love that still lingered despite everything. When the day came, Elizabeth went first. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the letter. "Mark," she began, her voice quivering, "I can't begin to express how sorry I am for the hurt I've caused you. I've spent countless nights thinking about what I did and the pain I've inflicted. I wish I could take it all back, but I know that's impossible. All I can do now is try to make things right and show you that my love for you is real and enduring." She paused, wiping away tears. "I let my loneliness and insecurities drive me to make the worst mistake of my life. But through all this, I've realized how much you mean to me, how much our marriage means to me. I am committed to rebuilding the trust I've broken and proving to you that I am worthy of your forgiveness." Her words were raw and heartfelt, and for the first time, I saw the depth of her remorse. When it was my turn, I took a deep breath and began to read my letter. "Elizabeth, your betrayal shattered me in ways I never thought possible. The trust I had in you was absolute, and when that was broken, it felt like the ground beneath me had given way. I have been angry, hurt, and lost, trying to understand why this happened and what it means for us." I glanced at her, seeing the pain in her eyes. "But despite all of this, I still love you. Our history, our memories, and the life we've built together are not something I can easily discard. I want to believe that we can get through this, that we can come out stronger on the other side. It's going to take time, and it's going to be hard, but I'm willing to try if you are." Dr. Harris nodded approvingly. "These letters are a significant step forward. You've both expressed your feelings honestly and openly, which is crucial for healing." As we left the counseling session, Elizabeth reached for my hand. "Thank you for not giving up on us," she said softly. We continued to work on our relationship, finding new ways to connect and communicate. We established weekly date nights, where we would do something fun and different each time, whether it was trying a new restaurant, going to a museum, or simply taking a long walk together. One evening, Elizabeth suggested we visit the bookstore where she worked. It was a place that had been tainted by her affair, but she wanted to reclaim it as part of our story. I agreed, though the thought made me uneasy. As we walked into the store, I could see the apprehension on her face. She showed me around, introducing me to her colleagues and pointing out her favorite sections. I could see how much she loved this place, and I realized that it was an important part of her identity. We spent the afternoon browsing books, sharing recommendations, and discussing our favorite authors. It was a simple yet profound experience that brought us closer together. For the first time, I felt a sense of peace in the bookstore, as if we were rewriting the narrative of what it meant to us. The process of healing was far from over, but moments like these gave me hope. Elizabeth and I were rediscovering each other, slowly rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. It was a long and difficult journey, but with each step, we were moving forward, together. One of the hardest things about rebuilding our marriage was the constant presence of Michael in the back of my mind. Despite Elizabeth's reassurances that their relationship had ended, I couldn't shake the fear that he might still be lurking somewhere in her thoughts, or worse, that they might still be in contact. Trust, once broken, is incredibly difficult to restore. During one of our counseling sessions, Dr. Harris suggested we tackle this issue head-on. "Mark, your fears are valid, and they need to be addressed. Elizabeth, it's important for you to be transparent and supportive during this process." Elizabeth nodded, looking at me with earnest eyes. "I want to do whatever it takes to help you feel secure again. What can I do to reassure you?" I thought for a moment before answering. "I need to know that there is no contact between you and Michael. I also need you to be open with me about your feelings, even if they're difficult to discuss." Elizabeth agreed, promising to be completely transparent. She handed me her phone, allowing me to see her messages and emails whenever I needed to. This gesture, though small, was a significant step in rebuilding my trust in her. Weeks passed, and our communication improved. Elizabeth was true to her word, being open and honest about her feelings. She shared her struggles, her guilt, and her determination to make things right. I found myself gradually lowering the walls I had built around my heart. One evening, as we were sitting on the porch, Elizabeth turned to me. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. My heart skipped a beat, fearing the worst. "What is it?" I asked, bracing myself. "Michael came into the bookstore today," she said. "He wanted to talk, but I told him that there was nothing left to say. I made it clear that our relationship was over and that my focus is on repairing my marriage with you." I felt a wave of relief mixed with lingering unease. "How did he take it?" "He seemed to understand," she replied. "He apologized for everything and said he respected my decision. He promised not to contact me again." Her honesty was reassuring, but it also reopened old wounds. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions within me. "Thank you for telling me," I said finally. "It means a lot that you're being honest." Elizabeth reached out and took my hand. "I love you, Mark. I'm committed to us, and I'll do whatever it takes to rebuild your trust." As time went on, I found myself thinking less and less about Michael. Our lives slowly began to regain a sense of normalcy. We continued our date nights, exploring new activities and rediscovering old passions. We even took up hiking, finding solace and connection in the beauty of nature. One weekend, we decided to tackle a challenging trail we had never attempted before. The climb was steep and exhausting, but the view from the top was breathtaking. As we stood there, looking out over the vast expanse of trees and mountains, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment and hope. "Look how far we've come," Elizabeth said, her eyes shining with tears. "Not just on this hike, but in our relationship." I nodded, feeling a swell of emotion. "It's been a tough journey, but we're getting stronger every day." We stood there in silence, holding each other and taking in the beauty around us. In that moment, I realized that while the scars of Elizabeth's betrayal would always be there, they didn't have to define our future. We were forging a new path together, one built on honesty, resilience, and a renewed commitment to each other. As we made our way back down the trail, I felt a sense of peace and clarity. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, I felt confident that we were on the right path. Together, we could overcome anything. As the months passed, Elizabeth and I continued to make progress in our journey of healing. However, the path was still fraught with challenges. The ghost of Michael lingered, not just in our minds, but also in our small town, where encounters were inevitable. Each time Elizabeth saw him, she was honest about it, and though it was painful, I appreciated her transparency. Our lives were slowly returning to a semblance of normalcy. We started spending more time with friends and family, who were a vital support system. They knew about the affair, and while some were skeptical about our chances, others encouraged us to keep working on our relationship. It was during one of these gatherings that an unexpected opportunity for growth presented itself. One Saturday afternoon, we attended a barbecue at our friend Jack's house. It was a sunny day, the air filled with the smell of grilled meat and the sounds of laughter. I found myself relaxing for the first time in a while, enjoying the company of friends who had stood by us through thick and thin. At one point, Jack pulled me aside. "Hey, Mark, there's something I want to talk to you about," he said, his tone serious. "It's about Michael." I felt my stomach tighten. "What about him?" "He's been going through a tough time, too," Jack explained. "I know he's the last person you want to hear about, but he reached out to me. He feels terrible about what happened and wants to make amends. He asked if you would be willing to meet with him." I was taken aback. The idea of sitting down with the man who had played a part in nearly destroying my marriage was daunting, but I also felt a strange sense of curiosity. Perhaps this could be an opportunity for closure, for both Elizabeth and me. After discussing it with Elizabeth that evening, we decided it was worth a try. She supported my decision, understanding that this could be a critical step in our healing process. A few days later, I met Michael at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. He looked nervous, his usually confident demeanor replaced with uncertainty. As we sat down, he spoke first. "Mark, thank you for agreeing to meet with me," he said, his voice earnest. "I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I wanted to apologize in person. What I did was wrong, and I regret it deeply." I listened, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Why now?" I asked. "Why do you want to talk to me now?" "I've been doing a lot of soul-searching," he admitted. "I realized how much pain I caused, not just to you, but to Elizabeth as well. She means a lot to me, but I respect her decision to focus on her marriage. I needed to own up to my mistakes and try to make things right." His words were sincere, and for the first time, I saw him not as the man who had come between us, but as another flawed human being. "I appreciate your honesty," I said slowly. "This hasn't been easy for any of us, but we're trying to move forward." We talked for a while longer, discussing the impact of his actions and the ways in which we could all move on. It was a difficult conversation, but by the end of it, I felt a sense of release. The anger and resentment that had been festering inside me began to dissipate. When I got home, I shared the details of our meeting with Elizabeth. She listened intently, her eyes reflecting the emotional weight of my words. "How do you feel now?" she asked. "Surprisingly, I feel lighter," I admitted. "It was tough, but I think it was necessary. It helped me see things more clearly." Elizabeth hugged me tightly. "I'm proud of you, Mark. This is another step forward for us." As we continued to navigate our relationship, The meeting with Michael served as a turning point. It wasn't a magic fix, but it was a crucial step in the process of healing. Elizabeth and I were learning to face our past, no matter how painful, and use it as a foundation to build a stronger future. Our commitment to each other deepened, and with each passing day, the scars of the past began to fade. We were not just surviving, we were growing together. The turning point with Michael brought a new sense of clarity and closure to our lives, but the road to recovery was far from complete. Elizabeth and I had built a fragile trust, and every day was a test of its strength. Yet, the more we worked together, the more resilient we became. One evening, as we were cleaning up after dinner, Elizabeth approached me with a nervous but excited look in her eyes. "Mark, there's something I've been thinking about," she began. I put down the dish I was drying and turned to her, intrigued. "What is it?" "I've been considering going back to school," she said. "I want to get my degree in literature. Working at the bookstore made me realize how much I love it, and I think it could be a fresh start for both of us." Her words took me by surprise, but in a good way. "That's a great idea, Elizabeth. I think it would be amazing for you to follow your passion." She smiled, relieved by my response. "I've already looked into some programs, and there's one at the community college that starts next semester. It's part-time, so I can still work at the bookstore." I nodded, feeling a sense of pride in her determination. "We'll make it work. I'll support you in any way I can." Elizabeth's decision to go back to school injected a new sense of purpose and excitement into our lives. She enrolled in the program and started attending classes in the evenings. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and it inspired me to think about my own goals and passions. One Saturday, while Elizabeth was studying, I decided to take a walk in the park. It was the same park where I had first seen her with Michael, but today it felt different. The painful memories were still there, but they were overshadowed by the progress we had made. As I walked, I thought about my own dreams and how I could pursue them. I had always been interested in photography, but had never taken it seriously. With Elizabeth's encouragement, I decided to enroll in a weekend photography course. It felt liberating to finally invest time in something I was passionate about. Over the next few months, our lives took on a new rhythm. Elizabeth was thriving in her classes, and I was finding joy in capturing moments through my camera lens. We shared our experiences with each other, and it brought us even closer. We were both growing individually and as a couple. One evening, after finishing her homework, Elizabeth handed me a beautifully bound book. "I made this for you," she said, her eyes shining with anticipation. I opened it to find a collection of photographs I had taken over the past few months, each one accompanied by a short poem or quote that Elizabeth had written. It was a stunning blend of our passions, and I was deeply moved by her thoughtfulness. "This is incredible, Elizabeth," I said, my voice filled with emotion. "Thank you." She smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. "I wanted to show you how much your support means to me. We've come so far, Mark, and I'm grateful for every step we've taken together." We sat together, flipping through the pages of the book, reminiscing about the moments captured in the photographs and the words that accompanied them. It was a testament to our journey, a reminder of how far we had come and the future we were building. As the months turned into a year, we continued to grow and heal. Elizabeth graduated with her degree in literature, and I started showcasing my photography in local galleries. Our lives were full of new experiences and shared dreams. The scars of the past were still there, but they had become a part of our story, not the defining chapter. We had learned to embrace our imperfections, to find strength in our vulnerabilities, and to cherish the love that had endured. In the end, it wasn't the betrayal that defined us, but the way we chose to rebuild our lives together. We had faced the darkness and come out stronger, more resilient, and more in love than ever before, and for that, I was eternally grateful. As the years went by, our lives continued to evolve in ways we never imagined. The wounds of the past had healed significantly, leaving behind scars that told a story of resilience and love. Elizabeth and I had grown closer than ever, our bond strengthened by the trials we had overcome together. One sunny afternoon, while we were enjoying a peaceful weekend at the lake cabin, Elizabeth turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Mark, I've been thinking a lot about our journey, and I have an idea I'd like to discuss with you." I looked at her intrigued. What is it? She took a deep breath, her eyes sparkling with excitement. I want us to write a book together, a book about our story, our struggles, and how we rebuilt our marriage. I think it could help others going through similar situations. The idea took me by surprise, but it made perfect sense. We had been through so much and had learned valuable lessons along the way. Sharing our story could offer hope and guidance to others facing infidelity and the challenge of rebuilding trust. I think that's a wonderful idea, I said, smiling. Our story could really make a difference. Elizabeth's face lit up with joy. I'm so glad you think so. We can start by outlining the key events and lessons we've learned. It will be a way for us to reflect on our journey and give back to others. We spent the next few months working on our book. It was a cathartic experience, revisiting the painful moments and celebrating the triumphs. We wrote about the initial discovery of the affair, the intense emotions that followed, and the steps we took to rebuild our relationship. We included practical advice, emotional insights, and the importance of open communication and professional counseling. One of the most powerful chapters was dedicated to forgiveness. Elizabeth wrote from her perspective about the immense guilt she felt and the process of seeking forgiveness. I wrote about the struggle to forgive and the realization that forgiveness was not just about her, but also about freeing myself from the burden of resentment. As we worked on the book, we found ourselves growing even closer. Writing together allowed us to see each other's perspectives more clearly and appreciate the progress we had made. It was a testament to our resilience and commitment to each other. When we finally finished the manuscript, we decided to self-publish it. The response was overwhelming. Readers from all over the world reached out to share their own stories of struggle and healing. Our book resonated with many, and we received countless messages of gratitude and support. One evening, as we sat on our porch, reflecting on the journey we had documented, Elizabeth turned to me with a contented smile. I feel like we've come full circle, Mark. Sharing our story has brought us even closer and given our pain a purpose. I nodded, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. It has, and it's a reminder that no matter how difficult things get, there's always hope and a way forward. Our book's success led to invitations to speak at various events and conferences. We shared our story with audiences, answering questions and offering guidance to those in need. It was incredibly rewarding to see the impact our story had on others, and to know that we were making a difference. As we continued to share our journey, we also made sure to nurture our relationship. We kept our weekly date nights, went on new adventures, and supported each other's passions. Elizabeth continued to write, now working on a novel inspired by our experiences, while I pursued my photography with a renewed sense of purpose. Life was not without its challenges, but we faced them together, armed with the lessons we had learned. Our love had been tested in the most profound way, and we had emerged stronger and more resilient. Looking back, I realized that the betrayal, while painful, had ultimately brought us closer. It had forced us to confront our vulnerabilities, communicate openly, and prioritize our relationship. We had transformed our pain into something beautiful and enduring. In the end, our story was not just about surviving infidelity. It was about the power of love, forgiveness, and the unyielding strength of the human spirit. And as we looked toward the future, we knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, hand in hand, heart to heart. Years had passed since we published our book, and Elizabeth and I had settled into a life filled with new purpose and deeper connection. Our journey of healing had taken us to places we never imagined, both physically and emotionally. We had found a new rhythm, one that embraced the past, but looked forward to the future with hope and optimism. One summer evening, Elizabeth and I were invited to speak at a relationship retreat in the picturesque countryside. The retreat was designed for couples looking to strengthen their bonds and overcome challenges. As we drove through the rolling hills, we felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. This was the first time we would be sharing our story in such an intimate setting. The retreat was held at a charming rustic lodge surrounded by lush gardens and tranquil walking paths. As we checked in, we were greeted by the retreat organizers, a kind and welcoming couple named Tom and Susan, who had read our book and were eager to hear us speak. "We're so glad you're here," Susan said, shaking our hands warmly. "Your story has inspired so many people, and we're honored to have you share it with our group." That evening, We gathered in a cozy, candlelit room with about a dozen couples seated in a circle. The atmosphere was intimate and supportive, with an air of anticipation. Tom introduced us, and as we began to speak, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. This was not just about reliving our past, but about offering hope and guidance to others. Elizabeth started by recounting the early days of our marriage, the moments of joy, and the gradual drift that led to her affair. Her honesty and vulnerability set the tone for the evening, and I could see the impact her words had on the audience. When it was my turn, I spoke about the pain of discovery, the struggle to forgive, and the painstaking process of rebuilding trust. We learned that healing is not a linear journey, I said, looking around the room. There were setbacks and moments of doubt, but what kept us going was our commitment to each other and the willingness to face our pain head-on. After our talk, we opened the floor for questions. The couples shared their own struggles and sought advice. One couple, James and Rebecca, spoke about their difficulties in communicating after an emotional affair. "How did you learn to trust again?" Rebecca asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "It took time and transparency," Elizabeth replied. "We had to be completely open with each other, even when it was uncomfortable. Trust was rebuilt one small step at a time." James nodded thoughtfully. "And what about forgiveness? How do you move past the anger and hurt?" "It's a process," I answered. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or condoning what happened. It means choosing to let go of the resentment and working towards a future together. It's not easy, but it's possible." The evening was filled with heartfelt conversations and shared experiences. As the night drew to a close, Susan invited everyone to take a moment for a silent reflection. The room was filled with a sense of peace and understanding, a shared recognition of the struggles and the hope for healing. After the session, Elizabeth and I took a walk in the gardens, the cool night air refreshing after the intensity of the evening. "That was powerful," she said, her hand in mine. "I feel like we really connected with them." "I think so too," I replied. "It's incredible to see how our story can help others." The retreat continued for the next few days, with workshops and activities designed to strengthen relationships. We participated in group discussions, shared meals with the couples, and offered one-on-one support. It was a transformative experience, not just for the attendees but for us as well. It reaffirmed our commitment to each other and to the work we were doing. On the last day of the retreat, Tom and Susan organized a closing ceremony by the lake. Each couple was asked to write a letter to their partner, expressing their hopes and commitments for the future. As we sat by the water, the sun setting in a blaze of colors, Elizabeth and I wrote our letters in silence. When it was time to read them aloud, I looked into Elizabeth's eyes and felt a rush of emotion. "Elizabeth, you are my strength and my inspiration. Our journey has been difficult, but it has brought us closer than I ever thought possible. I promise to always be there for you, to support you, and to love you with all my heart." Elizabeth's eyes glistened with tears as she read her letter. "Mark, you are my anchor and my confidant. I am grateful every day for your forgiveness and your love. I promise to cherish our moments together, to communicate openly, and to never take our bond for granted." The ceremony ended with a group hug, the couples united in their shared experiences and renewed commitments. As we walked back to the lodge, Elizabeth and I felt a profound sense of peace and fulfillment. Our journey was far from over, but we had learned that with love, honesty, and perseverance, we could face any challenge. And as we looked toward the future, we knew that we would continue to grow together, hand in hand, heart to heart, sharing our story and our love with the world. Life had settled into a new normal for Elizabeth and me. We continued to grow both individually and as a couple, finding joy in the small moments and strength in our shared experiences. Our work with other couples had become a central part of our lives, giving us a sense of purpose and fulfillment. However, just when we thought the turbulence was behind us, an unexpected call shook our newfound stability. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when the phone rang. Elizabeth was in the kitchen preparing lunch, and I was in the study, sorting through some old photographs. The ring of the phone echoed through the house, and I picked it up without thinking. "Hello?" I answered, expecting it to be a routine call. "Mark?" The voice on the other end was hesitant, unfamiliar, yet somehow striking a chord deep within me. "This is Michael." My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't heard from him since that day at the bookstore. Michael, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. What do you want? There was a pause, as if he were gathering his thoughts. I know this is unexpected, but I need to talk to you. It's about Elizabeth. My grip tightened on the phone. What about Elizabeth, Thai? I asked, my mind racing through 1,000 possibilities. It's not what you think, Michael replied quickly. I need to see you in person. There's something important you need to know. I was torn between curiosity and a desire to protect the fragile peace we had built. Fine, I said finally. Where and when? We agreed to meet at a small cafe on the outskirts of town the following day. As I hung up the phone, I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. What could Michael possibly have to say that was so important? I decided to tell Elizabeth about the call. She deserved to know, and transparency had become the cornerstone of our renewed relationship. Michael called, I said as I walked into the kitchen. Elizabeth looked up from chopping vegetables, her expression a mix of surprise and apprehension. He wants to meet me, says it's about you. Elizabeth's face paled slightly, but she nodded. Do you want me to come with you? She asked, her voice steady but laced with concern. I shook my head. No, I'll handle this, but I wanted you to know. The next day, I arrived at the cafe early, my mind still swirling with questions. Michael was already there, sitting at a corner table, looking tense and uncomfortable. As I approached, he stood up and extended a hand. I shook it reluctantly, then took a seat across from him. Thank you for meeting me, he began, his eyes flickering with unease. Get to the point, Michael, I said, my patience wearing thin. What do you have to say about Elizabeth? He took a deep breath. I've been doing a lot of thinking since everything happened. I know I caused a lot of pain, and I regret it deeply. But there's something I found out recently that you need to know. My pulse quickened. What is it? It's about a health condition, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. During our time together, Elizabeth mentioned some symptoms she was experiencing. I didn't think much of it at the time, but I recently went through a health scare of my own and realized it might be more serious. I felt a chill run down my spine. What symptoms? He described them: fatigue, occasional dizziness, and some other minor issues. It could be nothing, he said quickly, but it could also be something that needs attention. I thought you should know so she can get checked out. My initial anger at Michael's intrusion softened into concern for Elizabeth. Thank you for telling me, I said, standing up. I'll make sure she sees a doctor. As I drove home, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Elizabeth's health was my priority, and I knew I had to approach this carefully. When I walked through the door, Elizabeth was waiting for me, her eyes full of questions. What did he say? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. I took her hands in mine and told her everything. We need to get you checked out, I finished, just to be safe. Elizabeth nodded, her expression serious. I'll make an appointment tomorrow. The following weeks were filled with doctor's visits and tests. The waiting was agonizing, but we faced it together, leaning on each other for support. Finally, the results came back, and we sat in the doctor's office holding our breath. Everything looks fine, the doctor said with a reassuring smile. There's nothing serious to worry about, but it's good you came in. Always better to be safe. Relief washed over us like a tidal wave. As we walked out of the office, Elizabeth squeezed my hand. Thank you for being there for me, she said softly. Always, I replied, feeling a renewed sense of gratitude for the life we had rebuilt together. In the end, the unexpected call from Michael had served as a reminder of what truly mattered: our love, our commitment, and our willingness to face whatever came our way. Together, we could handle anything. The scare with Elizabeth's health had brought us even closer together. We had faced our fears head-on and come out stronger. Life had a way of reminding us of what truly mattered, and we were determined to cherish every moment we had together. One sunny morning, as we enjoyed breakfast on our porch, Elizabeth turned to me with a thoughtful expression. Mark, there's something I've been thinking about, she began, her voice gentle yet firm. What is it? I asked, curious. She took a deep breath. I think it's time we took a trip, just the two of us. Somewhere we've never been before, where we can create new memories and start fresh. The idea of a trip sounded perfect. We had been so focused on healing and helping others that we hadn't taken time just for ourselves. I love that idea, I said with a smile. Where should we go? Elizabeth's eyes sparkled with excitement. How about Europe? We could visit Paris, Rome, and maybe even take a train through the Swiss Alps. It was an ambitious plan, but the thought of exploring new places with Elizabeth filled me with excitement. Let's do it, I agreed. We deserve this. Over the next few weeks, we planned our itinerary, booked flights and accommodations, and eagerly counted down the days until our departure. The anticipation of the trip brought a new sense of joy and excitement to our lives. Finally, the day arrived. We boarded the plane, holding hands as it took off, leaving our worries in the past behind. Our first stop was Paris, the city of love. As we strolled along the Seine River, visited the Eiffel Tower,